Well, hello, friends of the Babylonian Talmud. So I am here to work through actually the very beginning of the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Berakhot, in chapter one. It starts with a Mishnah and then it moves into the Gemara commentary on that Mishnah. And so I have on the screen here a PDF of the text that we'll be working through. We're just going to work through the Mishnah here and then the Gemara, probably right up until somewhere around here, probably. So we'll get through this first paragraph and then maybe a little bit of the second. It's quite lengthy, takes a long time to work through, so we're just going to take it in a little bit of piece here. But just to clarify, the Mishnah as a document was written between 70 and 200 AD, finished around 200. Then the first commentary on the Mishnah, which is compiled in the Gemara, known as the Yerushalmi or the Jerusalem Talmud, that's finished around 400 AD. So just to clarify, Gemara is commentary on the Mishnah. When you put Mishnah and Gemara together, that's when you get a Talmud. And again, there are two Talmuds. One is the Jerusalem Talmud, finished in 400 AD, and the more popular one that more people look at, that's been translated more widely. It is larger. It is just overall a little bit better for scholarship, is the Babylonian Talmud that we're looking at here, BT. And this was compiled in Babylon at rabbinic academies out there and finished around 600 AD. And so you see here that this Mishnah that we have over here was ultimately completed between 70 and 200 AD. But then this Gemara, actually, it has aspects of the Mishnah in it that are cited that we'll get into. It has aspects of the Yerushalmi, of the Jerusalem Talmud that are cited in it. And those sages that we hear cited are called the Amoraim from the Amoraic period. And then it also has aspects from the Babylonian Talmud itself, from the group called the Stamaim. So we'll get into all of those and point out those voices as we go. But let's go ahead and start here with this Mishnah. So the question that the Mishnah asks is, from what time may one recite the Shema in the evening? So that, first of all, is the question that the Mishnah is concerned with. And the Gemara is then going to pick up on that later. So we'll consider that in a moment, but that's going to be the key question. From what time may one recite the Shema in the evening? Okay, the answer is from the time that the priests enter their houses in order to eat their truma until the end of the first watch. That is when, according to the Mishnah, someone can recite the evening Shema. That's the range. And that's what the words of Rabbi Eliezer say. But the sages say, and these are some of the other people who compiled the Mishnah, some of the other what we call them Tanaim, they say you can recite the evening Shema until midnight. We have another voice that comes out again. Rabbinic literature is characterized by fierce debates between many groups. So Rabbi Gamliel says until the dawn comes up. Once it happened, now we're going to go into a little bit of a story, classic rabbinic literature. Once it happened that his sons came home late from a wedding feast, and they said to him, "We have not yet recited the evening Shema." He said to them, "If the dawn has not yet come up, you are still bound to recite." And not in respect to this alone did they so decide, but wherever the sages say until midnight, the precept may be performed until the dawn comes up. The precept of burning the fat and the sacrificial pieces too may be performed till the dawn comes up. Similarly, all the offerings that are to be eaten within one day may lawfully be consumed till the coming up of the dawn. Why then did the sages say until midnight? In order to keep a man far from transgression. So basically, the conclusion is, well, the sages wanted to basically build a fence, ensure that people were extra careful about when they recited the Shema so as to not miss the window. So that's the Mishnah. And if you were someone just reading the Mishnah, you would work with that and kind of, see what you can derive halachically, what you can derive in terms of legal ramifications from that. But we're going to see that the Gemara, which again, Mishnah plus Gemara equals Talmud. We're in the Babylonian Talmud right now. So I also will kind of say Gemara, I'll say Talmud, and I'm kind of using those interchangeably. Although strictly speaking, Talmud really is Mishnah plus Gemara. So in Gemara, in Talmud, colloquially speaking, in Gemara, the rabbis end up not being concerned with that entire statement, we'll see, but they end up being concerned with just a very little part of it. So let's see what part they are concerned with. Okay, so we're going to jump down here to the Gemara. So first of all, we have a question. On what does the Tana base himself that he commences from what time? So let's go ahead and break that apart. First of all, what is a Tana? A Tana just is someone who was a sage, who was a rabbi during the Tanaitic period, that is the Mishnaic period. It's the period of the Mishnah 70 to 200. So we're talking about on what does the writer of the Mishnah here base himself that he talks about from what time? So, the best way that I think about this is we're talking about from what time may one recite the Shema in the evening. But the question is, well, do we actually have basis for there being an evening Shema? The problem with Mishnah is that Mishnah is very condensed. So what that means ultimately is that the Talmud will expand upon the Mishnah, the Gemara will expand upon the Mishnah, and what it often asks about the Mishnah is, what is the Mishnah's scriptural basis for this conclusion? So the Mishnah often doesn't include scriptural citations, although the Gemara does a lot of, you'll actually see over here that all of these italics are actually scriptural citations. So the Gemara definitely relies on scripture, but the Mishnah it does rely on scripture, but not explicitly. It often doesn't explain its scriptural reasoning. So the Gemara comes in and says, let's go ahead and make sure that we show the work that the Mishnah is doing when it comes to scripture. So the question here is, on what does the Tana base himself that he commences from what time? In other words, if we're going to talk about there being the time that the evening Shema recitation can begin, we first need to establish that there is such a thing as an evening Shema, that the Bible establishes that an evening Shema exists. So basically, the Gemara here is saying, what is the Hebrew Bible source that talks about there being an evening recitation? Is it ever stated in the Hebrew Bible that there is such a thing as an evening Shema recitation? They want to make that explicit. So phrasing this differently, we can say, basically, the Gemara wants to show that there is such a thing as an evening Shema, such that the Mishnah can then ask the question, from what time does this evening Shema, which exists per the Bible, from what time can that begun to be said? So that's question number one, which is very much a question about the biblical source. We're looking for a Hebrew Bible source that talks about there being an evening Shema. So that's question number one. Now, question number two is going to be, furthermore, why does he, the Tana, this Tanaitic sage who wrote the Mishnah, why does he deal first with the evening Shema? Look over here. From what time may one recite the Shema in the evening? That's a little bit odd. Why are you talking about the evening first? Think about a day. Okay, the sun rises, it's morning, the sun sets, it's evening. We think about a day, it's starting and stopping, beginning and ending. Sun rises, sun sets, morning and evening. It's a little bit strange to start a discussion with the end of the day. And the Gemara here picks up on that. Why does this sage deal first with the evening Shema? Why does the Mishnah talk first about the evening, about the night, and then move to the and presumably then move to the morning? And the Tani or the Gemara even says here, let him begin with the morning Shema. Why didn't the Mishnah let him begin as a common way to basically ask, why didn't the Mishnah start with an alternative formulation, being, why didn't he begin by talking about the morning Shema? Well, both of those questions are going to be answered. First of all, is there such a thing as a Shema, as an evening Shema instituted in the Hebrew Bible, such that we can ask, what time does that recitation begin for this evening Shema, which exists? And then second, we need to learn, why is the evening Shema the first thing that's dealt with? So that's kind of a question of literary style. Why does the arrangement of the Mishnah put the evening first and then the morning? Well, both those questions are going to be answered by an appeal to scripture, actually to Deuteronomy 6, where we find the Shema right there itself. It says the Tana, the person who wrote the Mishnah, bases himself on the scripture, where it is written, and this is now citing Deuteronomy 6, and thou shalt recite them when thou liest down and when thou risest up. So now we have our citation that is doing two things. First of all, it's answering the question, why does the Tana talk about the time for an evening Shema to begin? That means that we have to learn about there even being an evening Shema. Well, yes, there is. And thou shalt recite them when thou liest down. Lying down, evening, those are kind of equivocated. So, yes, we have an evening Shema. On what does the Tana base himself? The Tana says that there is such a thing as an evening Shema. Then later we can ask the question, from what time should that Shema begin? And second of all, why does the discussion of the Tana of the Mishnah begin with the evening Shema? Well, look at Scripture itself. And thou shalt recite them when thou liest down, and then when thou risest up. The Hebrew Bible language itself begins with the evening. So that is why the Mishnah says, begin with that's why the Mishnah basically starts with the evening Shema, with the concern of when the evening Shema can be recited. And that here is what enables the Gemara to say, and he, the Tana, the Mishnah, states the oral law thus. When does the time of the recital of the Shema of lying down, and again, lying down, i.e. evening, when does the time of the evening Shema recitation begin? He is able to state the oral law. The Tana is able to state that oral law in the Mishnah based on the order in the Hebrew Bible itself. The Bible establishes in Deuteronomy 6 that the order of discussion is evening, then morning, and accordingly, the oral law copies the Bible and begins with evening. But this is not made explicit in the Mishnah. This is key. The Mishnah does not make explicit that the evening Shema is done first because of its dependence on the Hebrew Bible. This is very much something that we really only are going to get when we turn to Deuteronomy 6, when we kind of expand the Mishnah, which is what the Gemara does, and see, oh, this is actually basing itself on the Bible, and that's why they begin with the evening Shema discussion, and that's why they can even ask the question about there being about when the evening Shema begins, because the Bible establishes that such a thing as an evening Shema exists. So that's the key. That's why the oral law, that's why the Mishnah can be stated, when does the evening Shema begin? Now we have those two questions established. We have the question of why evening Shema first? And we have the question of, does that thing even exist? Yes and yes. So back to the text here. When does the time of the recital of the Shema of lying down begin? When the priests enter to eat their truma. And again, this is going back over here to the Mishnah. Now the Gemara is basically just restating the oral law in the Mishnah, except there's a key difference. If you look here, you see that the question is, from what time may one recite the Shema in the evening? And then over here we have, when does the time of the recital of the Shema of lying down begin? So that's also key. We now see that the language of evening Shema and the Shema of lying down have been equivocated, and that's based on Deuteronomy 6 up here. It talks about, and thou shalt recite them when thou liest down. And we think of, okay, lying down, bedtime, sleep, that's an evening activity. So the Bible itself is giving us that equivocation between lying down and evening. So we've established that Shema of lying down and evening Shema are the same thing. So another key is we have this statement here, when the priests enter to eat their truma. Okay. The Gemara, Talmud in general, is notoriously complicated to read because of its supposed digressions that it goes on that confuse people. This is an example where you could easily get confused and kind of want to follow the digression and completely miss the point that the stam, that the person who's compiling this Babylonian Talmud is trying to make. So when the priests enter to eat their truma actually has nothing to do with the concern here over the existence of an evening Shema in the Hebrew Bible, and two, over the evening Shema being mentioned first over a morning Shema, which kind of goes against common logic and common sense. The priests entering to eat their truma is not something we should consider right now. It is just a citation of the Mishnah. We need to stay focused on the Gemara's main question, which is, how does the Tana arrive at the conclusion that there is an evening Shema? And then why do we even talk about evening as coming first? So we can now continue from here, knowing that we're not going to be distracted by when the priests enter to eat their truma as a potential response, because ultimately the Babylonian Talmud in general, is not actually that concerned with conclusions as much as it is with patterns of reasoning. So that's really key. So this seems like a nice conclusion. The Babylonian Talmud, rabbinic literature in general, doesn't, have nicely defined conclusions. So whenever you see a conclusion that looks so simple like that, you kind of want to be on the lookout because it's probably not as simple as that. Let's continue on here. And if you like, I can answer. This is an alternate answer that the Stam, that the person compiling this Gemara, can basically share. So we have one answer for when the time, or basically we have one answer for why the evening Shema is discussed first in the Mishnah, and that is that in Deuteronomy 6, which institutes the Shema recitation, lying down, the Shema of lying down, the evening Shema, comes first in the discussion before the morning Shema. But we also learn the precedence of the evening from the account of the creation of the world, where it is written, and there was evening, and there was morning one day. So even in Genesis, even when we're discussing the very foundation of the earth, evening is discussed before morning. So this is basically just further support that it's not totally out there to talk about evening before morning. We're just adding and supporting proof texts. These are things that maybe the author of the Mishnah was considering when he put the evening Shema's discussion and time of recitation before the morning Shema. Maybe he wasn't, but the authors of the Gemara are really just trying to saturate the Mishnah and show that it is based in Scripture. Let's continue on here. Why then does he teach in the sequel? The morning Shema is preceded by two benedictions and followed by one. The evening Shema is preceded by two benedictions and followed by two. Okay, notice how this capitalization here matches over here in the Mishnah. Whenever we see this capitalization, including over here, here, all of that, it is basically in this author's, or in this editor, in this press, Encino Press edition of the Talmud, they capitalize citations from the Mishnah. So this is a citation from the Mishnah, but I want you to look over here. Where do you see any language about benedictions, anything like that? It's not in this Mishnah. In this Mishnah right here, this section of the Mishnah is not found. I will go ahead and let the cat out of the bag and tell you that in the fourth section of Mishnah Berakhot, that this Babylonian Talmud is citing, that's when we get this Mishnaic citation. The rabbis are basically just jumping the gun and jumping ahead in the Mishnah, kind of ahead of time and letting us know. So, what's interesting about this is a little bit of contradiction from the Mishnaic author, because here, pay attention to the order of how this Mishnah discusses the Shema. The morning Shema is preceded by two benedictions and followed by one. The evening Shema is preceded by two benedictions and followed by two. I don't want you to get distracted with the language of benedictions. This is a real key. Mishnah, reading Talmud can easily, like I said, take you down many rabbit holes. And if you try to go down the rabbit hole of following them on language of benedictions and how many benedictions go with the morning Shema versus evening Shema, you are going to be lost, because that is not where the rabbis are trying to take you. The rabbis instead are trying to take you down a path of ordering. And they're citing another Mishnah that kind of is a contradiction, because in this Mishnah over here, evening Shema is mentioned first, and morning Shema comes later. But then in another discussion of those two kind of parts of the Shema, the morning Shema is mentioned first, and then the evening Shema. That is the only thing that you need to pay attention to. The style and order of one Mishnah has evening Shema, then morning Shema. The style of another Mishnah has morning Shema, and then evening Shema. We have broken the stylistic pattern that we expected, and that's why this Gemara asks, why does this Mishnah teach a little bit later morning Shema first, then evening Shema? That's really strange. And that leads the author of the Gemara to another alternative formulation. Let him there too, i.e., in this Mishnah that comes a little bit later, let him in that Mishnah right here mention the evening Shema first. Doesn't that make more sense? Okay, why wouldn't he be consistent and follow his pattern of evening Shema, then morning Shema? Why does he break the pattern? Let him there too, which is an inquiry into the Mishnah's style. Let him there mention the evening Shema first. That would make more sense. That would be a better alternative formulation if the pattern were to hold. But the Tana doesn't do that. The Tana, he says, begins with the evening Shema, and proceeds then to the morning Shema. While dealing with the morning Shema, he expounds all matters relating to it, and then he returns again to the matters relating to the evening Shema. So basically, that's just an explanation that says, a little bit strange. I'm not sure why in the second Mishnah we don't start with evening and then go to morning, but regardless, uh, this Mishnah ends up doing it. He starts with morning, then he goes to evening. So now we're going to basically move on. But before we do that, I want to say that we've established already that there is an evening Shema that happens. And now the concern really is with order. So we've already established per Deuteronomy and that biblical citation that an evening Shema is a thing. The evening Shema was instituted. The Shema of lying down is real. Now the new concern is style. Why are we switching up the order of the Shema? This seems really odd. Why have we gone from evening and then morning, and then why have we switched to morning and then evening? This is actually a chiastic structure, which is kind of fun. Chiasmus, A, B, B prime, A prime, folding in on itself and then folding out. Well, this is a classic chiasmus. This is evening Shema, morning Shema, morning Shema, evening Shema, all folding in on each other. Although I do want to note that what's really interesting is that in the Mishnah itself, if you were to take out Mishnah Berakhot and read this, you would see that it's not so perfectly laid out as the rabbis want you to imagine. What I mean by that is that here, within just a few lines of each other, we have evening Shema, morning Shema, morning Shema, evening Shema. Perfect chiasmus. But actually, in the Mishnah itself, we have evening Shema, then morning Shema, then we have pages and pages, and then we talk about morning Shema and evening Shema. So the chiasmus, yes, is there, but it's not so streamlined as the rabbis want us to imagine. And that is part of what Gemara does. It kind of is a little bit violent in some ways to the Mishnah, and pulls things from context and makes the Mishnah seem in some ways what it's not. So now we're going to continue here in this new paragraph. The master said, and this now is going to be a Mishnaic citation, so the master being a Tana, the writer of the Mishnah here. The master said, from the time that the priests enter to eat their truma, and this is in response to the question, from what time may that evening Shema be recited? Well, supposedly it's when the priests enter to eat their truma, and that's all well and good. But we have a slight problem. We are now in an era where the temple has been destroyed in 70 AD, and the priests are not a thing. The priests were a people that, people kind of group, social class that were working at the temple. The temple has not existed for hundreds of years. By the time that the Babylonian Talmud has been compiled, it hasn't existed for maybe 100 or so years by the time the Mishnah is compiled. So in both cases, when the Mishnah writes from the time that the priests enter to eat their truma as a response to from what time can the evening Shema be recited, and then also the Gemara picking up on that, both of them are not at all working with the institution of priests at the temple as kind of a real live institution. So it's very strange that they order the kind of time when the evening Shema can be recited based off of an institution that doesn't exist. That is a little bit strange, and we're going to have to explore that explore that more. So basically, the answer to when can the evening Shema be recited? From the time that the priests enter to eat their truma. Okay, that's again nice, but a little bit cryptic. The Mishnah is cryptic in this way. We now have a new question introduced because we have to rely on kind of the tradition of when a priest would have eaten his truma, when a priest would have eaten kind of like his evening sacrificial portion that was given to him. We have to assume that the priest ate at a certain time. That's because we're able to link the priest eating truma to the time that the evening shema can be recited. So we have to assume that the priests are eating at a certain time that can be pinpointed. But we kind of need to derive that answer as to when they were eating their truma, because the temple as an institution, the priest as a class, no longer exists. And of course, the Gemara picks up on this, and that's why the author then asks, when do the priests eat their truma? The question really is, why is the Mishnah choosing to express time by referring to priests that don't exist? We have to then ask when the priests eat truma because we're being expected to understand divisions of time based on a non-existent institution. So this is where the Gemara has to step in and say, okay, we have from the Mishnah that the evening Shema can be recited when the priests eat their truma, but we're going to have to add in something else to define when the priests were eating their truma. And that is, according to the Gemara here, from the time of the appearance of the stars. So supposedly what the Mishnah meant when it talked about the time that priests ate their truma was just when the stars appeared. Now, I will say that we don't actually have kind of any Mishnaic citation, any biblical citation for the time of the appearance of the stars, being the time of the evening Shema, being the time of the priests eating their truma. Supposedly, or we can kind of assume this is just a tradition that was passed down, but that's all that we really have to work with. Now, we have a question that comes up because we see that the Tana asks, let him then say, that is, why didn't the Mishnaic author just say from the beginning that the evening Shema can be eaten from the time, or the evening Shema can be recited from the time of the appearance of the stars? Let him then say is basically our clue that the Gemara author is wanting us to consider an alternative formulation. Why didn't the Tana just say something more clear from the start? So the Gemara is making a commentary on language here. So the Gemara is wondering, why didn't the Mishnah just come out and say, from the time of the appearance of the stars? Why wasn't that the reasoning for when the recitation of the evening Shema can begin? Well, the answer is this very thing he wants to teach us in passing, that the priests may eat truma from the time of the appearance of the stars. Classic rabbinic literature, classic Gemara here. Literally, it is just kind of an aside. Um, he basically, Gemara is saying the Mishnaic author, the Tana, just wants to teach us and make this side note. It's total aside that the priests ate their truma when the stars appeared. That's the response for why we have the priests entering to eat their truma, linking to the evening Shema. A little bit odd, I understand, but this is supposedly we're just supposed to take this is some extra fun information that you should just enjoy. Um, so ultimately, the Mishnah's concern, or the Gemara's concern here with the Mishnah, is word choice. Why did the Mishnah choose the words from the time the priests entered to eat their truma? Why didn't they choose from the time of the appearance of the stars? It's a question of supplementary information, right? So the Gemara, the Mishnah decides that it wants to add in some fun supplementary information that the priests ate truma from the appearance of the stars, but it is a little bit confusing. I completely agree with that. Just want to again drive home the point when we hear or see things like "let him then say" or "let him begin." or we had one up here too. Let him there too. When we have examples like that in the Gemara, they are ultimately formulations that introduce the following. They're supposed to interrogate the stylistic choice of the Mishnah by juxtaposing the Mishnaic formulation to an alternative formulation that is presented in the Gemara. These alternative formulations include ones like, okay, why didn't the Mishnaic author, who said that the evening Shema can be recited from the time that the priests enter to eat their truma, why couldn't he have just said from the time of the appearance of the stars? The Mishnaic redactor, the Mishnaic author really could have chosen to say that, and it wouldn't have changed the law. It wouldn't have changed it wouldn't have changed the law. Okay, the recitation of the evening Shema would have been the same because the priests ate their truma at the time of the appearance of the stars. Those are linked, and again, those are then both linked to the evening Shema. So the law wouldn't have changed. The evening Shema recitation would have stayed the same. The law would have been expressed differently, but the legal implications, would have been completely the same. So formulations like let him then say, why didn't the Tana say? They're introducing an inquiry into the Mishnah's stylistic choice. The Babylonian Talmud, loves to do this. It loves to interrogate the stylistic choices of the Mishnah. Why did it choose to do this instead of that? So that's where we're kind of at, and that's where I'll leave you right here. So just to recap, going back to, I just want to drive home kind of what the Gemara is concerned with. You might think that the Gemara is concerned with from what time may one recite the Shema in the evening. That is actually not the original concern of the Gemara. The Gemara's concern instead is, if you're going to talk about an evening Shema, Mr. Mishnah, you need to establish that that actually exists. And the Gemara already assumes the Mishnah has a scriptural basis, but the Gemara's job is to kind of expand the Mishnah. My advisor always likes to talk about those little kid toys where they're really small. Like you could take a little small turtle and you soak it in water, like a little play toy, and it just expands like 10 times its size. That's basically what the Mishnah is. The Mishnah is the toy turtle before it's been placed in water and expands. It's super, super condensed. It has everything inside of it. It's ready to be expanded, but it's just waiting for those rabbis to come along and add in the citations. So inherent in the Mishnah is that there is such a thing in the Bible as an evening Shema, but the Gemara has to first establish that such a thing as an evening Shema exists before we can even ask, well, what time do we start, reciting the evening Shema? We have to first ask, when does that happen? When is there an evening Shema established in the Bible? And so that's where we really start. What is the Hebrew Bible source that talks about an evening Shema existing? And then the second main concern that becomes, we see that play out in commentary on this Mishnah and commentary on the other Mishnah that comes in, the chiastic structure, is why is the evening Shema discussed first? So we have a question, one of biblical source. The authors of the Gemara believe that the Mishnah has biblical source for talking about an evening Shema. An evening Shema exists, but we have to go and find it. And then second of all, why does the Mishnah start with the evening Shema? And again, there is biblical basis for that. They see that it's basically in Deuteronomy 6. You start with the Shema of lying down, which is linked, equivocated with the Shema of evening, the evening Shema. And then we have to, and then in addition, they also cite that Genesis passage, there was evening and there was morning. And then we have to ask, well, what in the world happens here that the morning Shema goes first and then the evening Shema in another Mishnah? So that's a whole nother separate kind of confusion and wrinkle we can talk about at another point. But that's something they kind of just throw in there and say, hey, check it out. Now there's another switch. Very interesting. And then we ended by talking about this answer that is given for when can the evening Shema begin to be recited, and that is from the time that the priests enter to eat their truma. But we have a problem because both the Mishnah and Gemara, both the Mishnah and Babylonian Talmud, were composed at a time when the priests were no longer a class, when the temple was no longer an institution. So we have to provide a response to this strange word choice, really, of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is choosing to express when the evening Shema can be recited by referring to, like I said, a class of people, the priests, that no longer exist. So the word choice is strange. Why was the choice? Why was the stylistic choice to use the words of talking about priests and eating their, evening sacrificial uh, offering kind of portion? Why are they eating their truma? Why is that the focus? And we learn, yeah, that's just kind of supplementary information that you're supposed to enjoy and run off with. Ultimately, priests eat truma when the stars appear. So if the evening Shema is recited when the priests eat their truma, and the priests eat their truma at the time of the appearance of the stars, A is to A goes to B goes to C, A can also go to C. That means that the evening Shema can be recited at the time of the appearance of the stars. We can use our nice kind of logical linking pattern there. Again, random information that the priests eat their truma at the same time as the appearance of the stars, but that's just what we're basically what the Mishnaic author wants to teach us in passing, literally in passing. Um, but those are linked. So basically, we learn that the evening Shema can be recited at the time when the stars appear. So that is kind of a breakdown of a little bit of this Babylonian Talmud passage, looking at the Mishnah and then the Gemara commenting on it. Again, Mishnah and Gemara take so much time to work through them, and you can see that we've gotten through, how much and how much time did this take. So that's just something you have to keep in mind, is that this is a very slow and laborious process, but it's also one that's completely worthwhile and is a lot of fun when you have the time and can just work through it. So I encourage you to try this on your own. I, of course, have a long way to go and need to keep working in this myself, but it's an epic brain teaser, and I think there are so many reasons why studying this literature is good for anyone, why everyone should do it. And ultimately, you should also see from this that the rabbis earn their designation as kind of the first lawyers, the first lawyer class, and the first great thinkers. Um, not the first great thinkers. Obviously, we can go back to the Greeks and the Romans and so many more, but the rabbis really hold a special place in terms of the development of just ways of thinking that are confusing but are so good. So, hope this was helpful.